Hello and welcome to the National World War II Museum's podcast series, Service on Celluloid. Each week, our in-house experts sit down with special guests to discuss depictions of World War II on film. Sit back and get ready for a lively debate that will reveal the good and bad of how Hollywood shows the 20th century's most dramatic event. My name is Seth Paradin, historian and digital content manager here at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. And as always, we're sitting down with
Dr. Christelle Lefaucheur, research historian at the Institute for the Study of War and Democracy.
Our special guests for today's episode are Dave Walker, social media specialist at the museum and former entertainment writer.
Thanks, Seth. Glad to be here.
And Garrett Bradley, who is an award-winning filmmaker with projects spanning the Sundance Institute, the New York Times, and more.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you guys here. Today we'll be discussing the 1976 film Midway. The movie centers around the four-day Battle of Midway, which was fought from June 3rd through 7th, 1942. 6 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, American and Japanese aircraft carrier and land-based units engaged in a pitched battle that is often cited as being the turning point in the Pacific War. The film focuses on two major characters. One, a fictional American naval aviator played by Charlton Heston, who is an intelligence assistant officer who also happens to get assigned to the aircraft carrier Yorktown just as she sets sail from Pearl Harbor. And Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the brilliant mind behind the first 6 months of wild Japanese naval successes in the Pacific theater. The movie follows the actions of the American and Japanese participants in the battle in all aspects from the beginning of the battle through to the end. The film was directed by Jack Smite and showcases a myriad of Hollywood stars, such as Charlton Heston as the fictional Matt Garth, Henry Fonda as Admiral Chester Nimitz, Glenn Ford as Admiral Raymond Spruance, Hal Holbrook as Commander Joseph Rochefort, Toshiro Mifune as Admiral Yamamoto, and Robert Mitchum as Admiral William Halsey. The film was a success in terms of popularity when it was released, earning over $43 million. So the question that we always start off each one of these podcasts with, and I'll pose it to one of our two guests here, whoever wants to take it first, is, in your opinion, how accurate is this movie?
Not at all, as far as I can tell. I actually, though, I think some of the chronology is correct, and Seth, you can back me up on that. But I think if you were to just listen to it, it would be a fairly accurate account of how things happened and when they happened. Or is that not the case at all?
Well, no, yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the major points in the movie that are some of the major points of the battle that are shown in the movie are actually in chronological order to a point. There's a tremendous amount that they leave out of the film, very, very important things that happen in reality that they just, they just said the hell with it and they didn't want to put it in. I think the argument could be made that it'd be hard to cover this battle in a almost 3-hour movie. Was it 2 hours and 45 minutes or something?
Too long.
Yeah. It'd be hard to cover, a battle like Midway in 3 hours, say. And that's not true because, the majority of the action really only occurred over 3 hours. So it could be done. But to give it some credit, some of the actions and sequences that they show in the movie, did happen, and they did happen in that order. With those players too.
Right, that's the feel I got from it. But it's not the first reference you would send someone to learn about the Battle of Midway.
Oh God, no.
Yeah, okay, good. That's what I thought.
No, absolutely not. Garrett, what's your opinion on this movie?
There's a lot of different ways to be thinking about it, and accuracy for me is a good question, and this is sort of a roundabout way of answering it. But the sort of just lack of information for what happens before all of this, right? Like, what's the sort of inciting moment? What's the reason that there's this conflict? Is always sort of conveniently removed, and I think has a lot to do with some of the larger issues of how we understand history, which are often connected to false forms of nostalgia. So no, it's not accurate, but it also is completely removing information altogether, which I think is an important way of understanding fact versus fiction.
I would agree. What about you, Christelle?
Yeah, as you all three mentioned, there's some rough outline, let's say, of the battle. What's the rough strategy of the Japanese? I think we get a good sense of that, going through the illusion, and then for Midway. Also kind of the state of mind of the American, like, okay, we're really down to 4 carriers, 3 carriers, like this huge surprise and kind of massive defeat, of course, in Pearl Harbor, and then kind of the necessity or the desperate attempt to stop the advance of the Japanese, that we get a little bit of a sense of that. There's an emphasis on, the mistakes of the Japanese and or daring, actions. Maybe it's a little unbalanced. But, for a 76 movie, unlike the previous one, we actually do get a point of view from the Japanese. So that was kind of a welcome, which of course we had in Tora Tora Tora. But if we look at the 40s and the 50s, we don't get a lot of that. So, I learned a little bit. Not much, but, there's a lot of scenes of Jeeps driving here and there. I think we could have cut all of those and then get maybe a little bit more of vital information about what actually happened. Yeah. But yeah.
I think if they wanted to make, they being Jack Smite and his people, wanted to make an accurate depiction of Midway, they could have cut out the foolish love story that was in the movie. Yeah. I'll get to that later if we got the time, but that's ridiculous. But it clouds up a lot of room for telling what in reality, if you ever read about Midway, which I know we have, it's an incredible feat that the United States Navy, Marine Corps, and Army Air Forces were able to pull off. And there was a book written by Walter Lord about Midway called Incredible Victory, and it was an incredible victory. It really was. It was David and Goliath, and the story is there. The meat for the story is there.
It's interesting how the battle lives in the imagination of people. It's the most read historical post on the museum's website. And for whatever reason, the battle holds fascination. Could it be the fact that it was so far away, the combatants were distant from each other until the very last seconds of I don't know, there's just something about this battle that is...
maybe it's the beginning of the turning point. Until then, we were in defeat and the Japanese advance. And right. It's like the Americans stopped them at this point. And that's kind of this almost mythical position. And from then, which is not quite true, but from then this idea that, we regrouped and then we started winning, which of course took a little longer.
Just a few years.
But maybe that's the important part.
I think the love relationship, even if we will talk about it in a moment, but I just should say that I think it was fascinating because I think it was the purpose of it was, in my mind, to serve as a microcosm for how America is supposed to feel about the Japanese. And
at that time.
76. In 76.
Yeah.
And that there's this level of sympathy that we have at a moment, but then I think death and sort of the result of what happens with that main character leaves in our mind this sort of subconscious idea that maybe we still can't trust that relationship on some level, if that makes sense. But there was something to me that I felt like was very essential for what they were trying to do, despite it being racist and completely off. I understand why they needed to have some kind of direct relationship between two people that wasn't about being lost in translation physically.
Yeah.
Or at least one character who wasn't an officer, which is unusual from a lot of war movies. And the better war movies all consider the boots on the ground guys, where this was just mostly officers gnawing on each other and in the Situation Room. And I think the better World War II movies take a different perspective than that. And so maybe that was the motivation for adding those characters and adding that storyline, is to not just make it all guys in Situation Room.
Well, it's also such a cliche trope of, the son and the father. It's like the son is dying and the father is going, and he's dying too at the end. I forgot.
No, he hangs on. Charlton Heston is killed, but the son.
So there's this added element of we were all in it together, sons and fathers. Women are not in the picture, of course.
I think Garrett, you nailed it. I really do think it was more of a sign of the times. 76. This is how we should feel about the Japanese American internment and that whole really bad, dark part of American history. As to reality.
Right.
I know and knew tons of naval aviators, over 30 of which fought in this actual event, and I mean, that would not have happened.
Yeah.
Ever.
Right.
Never.
Well, and what's the purpose of making a film that you already know the ending to, right? Like, what's the purpose of making a war film unless it's to reappropriate our understanding of history, to reclaim the narrative? And the one way that most people are going to be able to do that, if they don't have direct experience with the war, is going to be through the threat of that personal relationship, which was explored in the film.
Yeah, yeah. It's got its fair share of inaccuracies, and not the least of which is this relationship that we're talking about. But one thing that I think it sort of kind of does okay, not well, okay, is the sense of the United States' sense of desperation at this point in the war. You got to remember, this is 6 months, actually 3 days less than 6 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor. And we had been getting, to put it cleanly, our plow cleaned all the way through the Pacific from one end to the other for 6 months of the war. And, it does briefly, I don't want to say cover, but it shows the Doolittle raid, the attack on Tokyo on April 18th, 1942. And it just talks about the Battle of Coral Sea, which was actually the first check in the Japanese advance, which occurred in May. And then we get to Midway. So it's boom, 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 April, May, June. And it does touch on the fact that we were desperate. We had no battleships that could go and travel with the carriers, and we were down to, as you said earlier, 3 aircraft carriers in the Pacific, and we're fighting this, the Spanish Armada. I mean, it's this huge, huge fleet. The largest fleet the Japanese had put to sea at that time was over 200 ships. So I think to a point, it does sort of kind of cover that to an extent. What do you guys think?
I think it's missing a key part of why all of this is happening, which was the embargo that we put on Japan. 90% of their oil, was imported. And so when you cut that off, I have no doubt that if that were to happen to us in America, we would fight back. We would find a way to go out and survive. And Japan was responding to something that we had provoked, which is a trend. It's something that we do. And when I say we, that's so interesting about having these conversations about war films is that, I'm an American. I'm a proud American. But if you look at history, time and time again, we instigate situations and then we respond to the backlash as if we are defending ourselves. And this entire film, in my opinion, is missing that reality, which is that, there were certain things that were happening as a result of something that we had done, and we were in a position to fight back. And yes, it was a huge feat that we won, but did we even have to fight to begin with, potentially? I mean, I'd like to even just pose that as a question. And this is my perspective, not being someone who's at all completely versed in my own history, right? But just sort of as like a layman's perspective on what we do, what we don't do, what this film is telling us our relationship was with Japan.
Well, I mean, Christelle, I know we can both get onto that, and everybody can get onto that a little bit if you've been around the museum a little bit. But that's a large conveation to have, and I'd be more than happy to have it. But I don't think we have the time to do it here
For such a little film.
Yeah. If you want to talk about that, watch Tora Tora Tora, the movie about the attack on Pearl Harbor. But
I think the film had to start making the assumption that the American cause was just, and
then it was,
and
it was.
that was, I think, an assumption on the part of everybody who would have seen it in 1976. Even the Japanese American sub-story wasn't really part of consciousness in 1976. The movement that began, resulted in legislation and reparations was still a decade off at that time. So I don't know if there was any patience on the audience's part for that kind of conversation.
Who was the audience?
Who was the audience? A lot of them were World War II veterans. Yeah. A lot of them. I mean, not all of them by any means, obviously, because it was made in 76. I mean, my dad saw it in the theater, and he damn sure wasn't a World War II veteran. But, I mean, you got to look at it this way. This, as I said, this is an exciting historical event that I think these people tried to make a movie about without thought for the implications of what had happened earlier in the decade, or even into the 30s. as far as the oil embargo and everything else. But you also got to understand, we put the oil embargo on Japan because they were being aggressive towards China.
Not just China, by the way.
Well, no, not just China, but that was a big issue.
Yeah. Which, of course, we had economic interest in China.
Sure, yeah.
But it's not like the Japanese were like, all pacifist and
Absolutely
just.
not.
I mean, they were
not.
already slaughtering people.
Yeah,
so
they were killing and raping babies and Nanking, so.
Sure. I mean, but I just think when we talk about war in general, war. If we could choose, wouldn't exist. It wouldn't be something that was even an option. So it isn't a matter of saying the Japanese were victims in the situation, they were fighting back. But I do think that for the purpose of history, for the purpose of thinking about anthropology and the documentation of history, a trackable lineage to how things occur is an essential part of what we're doing here, especially if you're going to make a film that will last beyond you, beyond your actors, your producers, your studio. You're recreating history. So it's important, I think.
When you're recreating history, it's important that you're accurate. And this movie damn sure ain't. What, Trista, you were going to say something?
I just want to come back earlier. At the beginning of the film, there's one scene that particularly I thought was accurate and resonated with me, was when Yamamoto?
Yamamoto.
Yeah, thank you. Yamamoto, is in his garden, and there's the news of the Doolittle raid. And the interaction is, well, now we have justification for being more militarily aggressive, which that was an inner political discussion between the emperor and, of course, the military guard in Japan that wanted to be even more. And it's almost like, oh, yes, now we have to, obviously the Americans can reach the island, and now we need to be even more forceful. Well, and that was really a tension then that I think they captured so slightly, but I think that was an important point.
It's a very important point because that's why one of the major reasons that the Japanese launched the offensive against Midway was because of the attack on Tokyo. Now, granted, the operation had been planned long before Tokyo was bombed in April of '42, but that bombing of mainland Japan by United States Army Air Force bombers, kicked the trigger, tripped the trigger.
Kind of precipitated a little bit.
It did, because there was infighting, and there always was, between the Imperial Japanese Navy and the Imperial Japanese Army. The Navy, under Yamamoto, wanted to launch this attack on Midway and take the island to take our furthest base. At that time, that was our furthest base in the Pacific. And the Army didn't want to support them, because that's just how they rolled. They just did not play well together.
Well, yeah, it's far away from the island. There's there's
and
issues of.
And they had a very good point. It was going to be hard to reinforce and hard to keep as a base, because it was way the hell out there, Midway. It's Midway in the Pacific. There's a reason it's called that. And after the attack on Tokyo, the Army realized, we got to stop this. This can't happen again. Yeah. So they were on board. And I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's how really the operation was kick-started. That's how they got the approval to go after the attack on Tokyo. So the movie doesn't explain all that, but it does show that, Tokyo's been bombed, we got to do something about this. So we're going to go get this place, and we're going to eliminate this one last threat. Something that they talk about in the movie that is wrong is, what's his name? Plays Nimitz, Fonda. Henry Fonda. He's a great actor, by the way.
Yeah.
But Fonda's talking about how that if Midway falls, then the next thing would be, or could potentially be, the United States, the west coast of the United States. And that's completely inaccurate. That never would have happened. The Japanese had no intentions ever, unless you watch Man in the High Castle, had no intentions of ever attacking the western coast of the United States. Invading, that is. The next target after Midway would have been Hawaii. And that's a fact. I mean, that they actually had invasion currency printed. But it was just another stepping stone. And what they were trying to do by taking Midway and then eventually Hawaii was force the United States to sue for peace. And obviously that
and also cutting all the routes between the United States and Australia and other
which is why Coral Sea occurred.
Yeah.
Well, let's get to Japanese internment, and let's go to treatment of the Japanese. We kind of brushed on this a couple of minutes ago when you were talking about, and again, I think you're dead accurate with that, is that it was a sign of the times. Had this movie been made in 1956, never would have been a storyline, not even close. And as inaccurate as it is, and it's woefully inaccurate, I think it is trying to get a message across. And I mean, what do you guys think? And we've already touched on it before. Let's keep it brief. But what do you guys think?
I was surprised to see it in the film. I didn't see this when it was released, and as an artifact of its time, it's jarring to me that it was introduced as story, and why that was. I've wondered since I'd seen it why the screenwriter, producer, director, why it became part of the drama at all. Because if you're making an epic, a big star epic in a sort of a big star blockbuster era in the mid 1970s, to even introduce something like that seems a little bit
silly.
Yeah, and like you say, the mainstream American audience or mainstream international audience that would be watching this, I don't know if that worked for them on any level. Whether they learned something about Japanese internment that they may not have known or forgotten or didn't want to know, or I don't know. I don't think it works as drama at all. And of course the actors issue.
It's annoying. I mean, if you want to make a movie about Japanese internment, do it, but don't do it in this. It's nah.
But what's funny is I am still skeptical. I mean, I'm saying it, yes, it's a reflection of the times, but I'm still very much skeptical of the purpose for why it's in the film. I mean, I think if we do think about the audience that it was made for, which are going to be mostly white men, veterans, this to me is like their worst nightmare. So it's like, why not put it in the film? In many ways, it's a warning of our deepest, darkest fears as white men in the 1970s who served in this war. And so I'm not trusting of it as being a sign of being progressive. I actually think in a lot of ways it's very manipulative in that way.
I think it's to attract female audience. I mean, there's so many films that were made in the late 40s and even 50s where the posters and the advertisement emphasize like a fraction of the film, like 3 minutes, which has something to do with romance, completely outside of really the realm of the film, just to advertise and to bring women in. It's the same nowadays. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think there's any kind of a political, ideological...
Really?
Well, in a sense, like they're trying to do something good. I think, it's either that we happen to have... Maybe there's an attempt to present Japanese American into kind of a more positive light. So we have the enemy, which can't be too positive. Then you need to have a Japanese civilian. But then there would be, that wouldn't work. So we need to have a Japanese American that's in the camp. There's a love story. I mean, I don't know.
I see. Infiltration. What if the enemy infiltrates your family? That's what this whole shit is about.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, I don't know. And he dies. So maybe he's punished for being in love with a
the
Japanese
father dies,
the
right?
father dies, not the son.
Well, he's burned.
He's progressive son.
He's burned, so he loses his,
That's the best part of his role too, by the way.
He's blonde. He's he's handsome in some criteria, not for me, but and then he's burned, so he loses his physicality. I don't know.
Well, let's get on to a part of the movie and the actual history that is very, very important to this event, and that's Codebreaking.
Oh, that was cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. It's very, very cool. And the Codebreaking done by Station Hypo, which is in Pearl Harbor, or which is in it's in Pearl Harbor, is what allowed us to even be there to ambush the Japanese fleet, which is exactly what the United States Navy did. It was run by Station Hypo was run by a gentleman named Joseph Rochefort, and he was a cryptanalyst, which is a codebreaker. He was a genius, an absolute genius, and he assembled a cast of characters within Station Hypo that were equal geniuses, and they broke the Japanese naval code, which was infamously difficult to penetrate, and this allowed us to not just get to Midway, but Coral Sea and Guadalcanal, and it didn't allow us to get to Guadalcanal, but we were reading their mail for all intents and purposes. And the film does show this with Hal Holbrook as Joe Rochefort, and I'll get to that in a minute. But what is your take, Christelle, on this part of the movie?
I thought that was an interesting scene. We get into the ins and outs on how first there's like a 10% reliability on his prognosis, which is, it's so narrow. And then there's this little trick of sending a message talking about the water boiler or something like that was broken, and if they use the AF, we know they're talking about that, which is actually, it's historically accurate. So that was kind of interesting to get in and out. I haven't read or follow if the description of the whole team and the environment is accurate. I mean, he's in his robe. He looks like this rogue,
Playboy.
It smells bad. There's smoking. There's no military discipline at all. But they're geniuses. So I guess we're going to let that go. That I think was a little over the top. You can only be a sloppy non-military guy in order
if you're a genius.
if you're a genius.
Yeah.
But otherwise, this kind of on one hand, the minimal, the little thing that you hold on the straw, this 10% of potential accuracy, and then this little trick to get to it. I thought it was kind of interesting.
It is, and now that you brought it up, Hal Holbrook. There's a lot of historical people in this movie. This movie shows Rochefort, Nimitz, Halsey, Yamamoto, and it goes on and on and on. Some of them are accurate to a point. Some of them are grossly inaccurate, and this is one of them. Hal Holbrook, I'm sure it wasn't his fault. I don't know. But Commander Joseph Rochefort was not this eccentric bathrobe-wearing, slipper, non-bath taking.
It's the 70s.
Maybe for Hal, but not for Joe. He died in 76 too, so he didn't really have a chance to defend himself. But I knew guys that worked with him in Station Hypo and helped break this code, and he was a gentleman. He was a true officer and a gentleman. He was not this guy that Hal Holbrook played, and the people that knew him were furious over this depiction of him, because that's what the depiction of Joseph Rochefort in a lot of people's minds is, this wacko who's down in his basement breaking code, and dude wasn't like that at all. And it's a disservice to him, in my opinion, because he was a guy who played a tremendously important historical role in the United States Pacific campaign, and especially only early in the war. And it's a disservice to him, the way he's portrayed in this film. And you mentioned AF. While they do show that in the movie, and it is accurate, they did send that message out, it's not for the reasons that they showed it in the movie. They sent it in the movie to try and, confirm that AF was Midway. And to a point, that's true, but in reality, they almost said Hal Holbrook, Joseph Rochefort had the message sent to Midway and sent back to convince Washington that Midway was the target, not to convince themselves. He knew. He was well aware. And everybody, Nimitz, they all knew Midway was the target. But Nimitz couldn't get the okay to let the dogs loose until Washington said, okay, yeah, you got, because he was playing with house money. If he loses these 3 carriers, we are done.
Yeah, and that's much more interesting, actually, to we got to get permission from the big house, before we make any decisions.
That is exactly it. Yeah. Well, the decisions had been made, but they didn't have the okay to cut them loose. Because if these 3 carriers are lost,
that's it.
We're done.
Right.
For the foreseeable future. Right. And that's what makes this battle so fascinating to a lot of people, is that this is it. It's an all or nothing gamble. There is no draw here. We either win or we lose. And I think they say something like that in the movie. I think it's the Japanese who actually say, either we win or we lose with this roll of the dice or something like that. And that's essentially true, but more for us than the Japanese.
Yeah.
That's interesting that Washington is kind of not really in the movie.
Yeah.
Like, it's like this is those those courageous intelligence and lucky admiral commandant, whatever, in the hierarchy of the Navy that make those decisions because, their guts and the information, of course. But there's not this, the accuracy, the historically accurate things would have been to bring in Washington and the negotiation. There's not a lot of that.
No.
It's okay, let's think among us and let's make a decision, which is very, again.
And to a point, there was that conversation with Nimitz and his people about, but that was weeks before the battle ever occurred. They knew that it was Midway. They had no doubt at all. That's why he was so confident in sending his people out.
One thing that makes me think about, just in terms of the depiction of his character and sort of being in this genius playboy code breaker, there were two lines in the film. One where he, what is his name? He says, do you guys ever shower down here?
Charlton Heston.
Right. And then there's another sort of funny interaction that happens between some of the guys in an actual jet eating Twizzlers.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And it's moments like those that I think say a lot as well about how Hollywood typically has dealt with our side, the quote-unquote our side versus the opponent, and how that is really illustrated in the amount of detail that is provided for human beings and the interactions that we're allowed to see, the things that make them human.
Right.
And we see them in America. But if we were to look at every single moment that we see the Japanese, there's this sort of bizarre, detached stoicism.
Yep.
There's never any...
Very wooden.
Yeah, it's very wooden. There's never any sign of humanity. And you can track that as sort of a device probably in almost every Hollywood film that's dealing with Americans and quote-unquote non-Americans or non-white Americans. So that I thought was very interesting. And I also think there's something funny happening with the casting, which was, it seemed like predominantly Asian Americans playing Japanese. So there was no real sense of accuracy in terms of even protocol or the way in which those soldiers were interacting with one another. The accents that they all had were very much American accents. And, I could go on and on. That could be its own podcast about how accents are used. There's sort of this uniform.
Incorrect accents.
Yeah, everyone has a British accent all of a sudden. And
they're German in the movie.
Yeah. So... Anyway, to that point, I think that there's an interesting thread that exists throughout. That's. Were you going to say something about that?
A couple of things. One is that Mifune's was dubbed by an Anglo-American, very famous voice actor named Paul Frees, who also did the voice of the Pillsbury Doughboy.
Out of here! I did not know that.
And also the voice of the narrator on the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland and Disney World.
Oh my God!
Paul Frees, and it's so weird to hear that voice blast out of that great Japanese actor's mouth. And at that point, the actor had done 16 films with Kurosawa.
Right.
And he was a world, global movie star. And then to hear that voice come out, I wanted to say about. Holbrook's character. I knew nothing about that character at all before, and I'll admit. But even the dubious and goofy, it drove me to find other sources to learn about it. I found a great YouTube recording of a lecture here at the museum that opened the Turning Point 1942 exhibit, and there's plenty of good resources to follow up on that. And so there's the benefit of a mediocre movie. Just a little bit of introduction to a character like that sort of made me double down on finding out more.
Yeah, it does tend to, if you have the interest, it does tend to drive you to look to find the real stories behind these people. And there's a lot of people in this movie to read about if you want to. I mean, there's days and weeks and months worth of reading.
Or a visit to the museum.
Or that. There's always that. There's a quote in the movie towards the end, and it's given by Henry Fonda, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, who says, quote, "Were we better than the Japanese or just luckier?" Unquote. And this is one of my questions. Does this film give credit where credit is due as in terms of the victory at Midway? And because it was mine, I'm going to answer first. No, it does not. This film, and I could go on for a week about how it's inaccurate on various different levels, but Battle of Midway was won by 3 squadrons of aircraft, by scouting 6, bombing 6, and bombing 3 from the Yorktown. The first 2 were from Enterprise. A lot of guys were killed in the process from the torpedo squadrons on all 3 aircraft carriers, Hornet, Yorktown, and Enterprise, and people from the island who flew off the island of Midway. And it does not address any of those people. It doesn't. That's one big thing with me, is that it doesn't address at all the flights from the island by the Marine Corps, by elements of the Navy, and even the Army Air Forces that went out there to try and stop the Japanese. And unfortunately, they didn't, and they lost a lot of people in the meantime. But for whatever reason, and I really don't know why, this movie focuses on the crew, really, and the ship, the USS Yorktown, which was, of course, the American aircraft carrier. It was sunk at Midway. And it seemingly everything happens around Yorktown, and that's not accurate. I mean, Yorktown was obviously there, and she played a large role, but the killing blows from Midway were launched from Enterprise, and there's a 1,000 fascinating stories about Midway from Enterprise that just are not covered in this movie at all, and it's in my opinion, it's again a disservice to those people as well, because it focuses on one small group that played one small part. And Navy flight, you mentioned there were a lot of officers in this movie, and there are, and rightfully so, because pilots of naval aviators in World War II, especially at Midway, were mostly by and large officers. So you were going to have, I mean, you had your enlisted gunners, but they really don't give, in my opinion, the credit where the credit is due to the dauntless pilots who killed the 4 Japanese carriers at Midway.
Were any of them 52?
No, they were not.
Because that's how old Charlton Heston was.
Yeah. That's kind of a theme with all war movies, I find, with the exception of maybe the Pacific, that was done a few years back, and to a point, Fury, although, but most of the actors are significantly older. One of the oldest flyers in Midway during in the real event was, in my opinion, the hero of the battle, Wade McCluskey. He was Enterprise Air Group commander. He was the guy that made the decision to keep looking for the Japanese fleet when he went to the point, and they weren't there. He made the decision to continue searching for them, and not he, but his people found them, and they sunk 2 carriers inside of 4 minutes. And if McCluskey doesn't make the decision to keep looking, they don't get there. So, and Wade was in his 40s, I think. So he was one of the older ones.
But to go back to the quote you just gave, I actually kind of liked it. Were we better than Japanese? Because it kind of took away of this traditional, usual, trope of American movie where basically we were better and that's why we won. And there is a number of scenes in the movie where I felt, gosh, we were lucky.
Oh yeah.
Like the Japanese send those, I don't know the technical term, those planes to. Yes, and then they decide on the radio silence. So I think the radio is broken.
The radio was broken.
Yeah, so that was lucky. Yeah. I mean, there's a number of things like that where we're like, okay, yes, we only had 3 carriers. Yes, we were lucky to break the code, or maybe we were so smart. That's why we broke the code. There's a number of moments in the film, I think, that point to, I think, to an element of luck. There's, of course, the hubris of the Japanese is emphasized. But same thing here. I mean, there's this whole scene where he decides, okay, I'm waiting for my planes to come back, and we switch to torpedoes, or we refuel, and then, oh, no, this message come in. This is too late. I don't have time. I mean, again, that was kind of lucky for us that this happened. So
no doubt.
Yeah, so I like that. I mean, it's such a short line and it disappeared quickly.
Well,
but there's an attempt to say, I thought there was an element of luck in the victory at Midway.
There's absolutely no doubt there was an element of luck at Midway. There was a tremendous amount of luck at Midway. There was a lot of skill, but there was a lot of luck because, again, talking about McCluskey, if he doesn't make that decision, which is not luck or skill, that's just, hey, this is what we're going to do. If they don't make that decision, if he doesn't make that decision, and if he's not lucky enough to see a Japanese destroyer racing down there to go to rejoin the Japanese fleet, and doesn't put that together in his head as to where that ship is going, they don't get there. The skill comes in when the SBDs dive on the Japanese carriers and kill them and sink them. That's where the skill is, but that's not luck. That's just skill.
Luck is sort of I think, eclipsed, though, by the implication that we deserve to win, too.
But we didn't. That's the thing.
Yeah, well, I agree. But I think that the sort of takeaway from the film is definitely this sort of nostalgic, and because we've established emotional connections to our characters again in a way that we have not with the Japanese, this element of luck somehow feels like a real payoff that is also very different from what luck actually is. So it's an interesting, I think, kind of takeaway for audiences. The expectation of luck on some level.
I thought the almost melancholy or uncertainty in Henry Fonda in his performance, I read that as to say, if this is going to work, we will need luck.
Yeah.
And not the expectation of it necessarily, although I totally get what you're saying. There is the sense that some luck is deserved when it's not, and it's just luck. And that, Fonda was great at that in characters, and that's the one sort of thing I read from his character is that we really don't. Let's hope that this works.
Yeah,
this better.
and that's true. That's accurate. I mean, like I said, he was very confident in sending his people out there. But he wasn't all that confident that we were going to be able to pull this off. Because if the Japanese somehow knew that we were coming, which they didn't obviously, but if they somehow knew and they ambushed us, we were in a bad way. Or even if we did successfully ambush them, if we didn't kill those 4 carriers and all of them, again, it's a moot point. I mean, if we don't go out there and deliver the killing blow to all of these people at one time in one day, it's kind of and he does do a good job of that. But I mean that's pretty damn accurate in terms of Admiral Nimitz at that point.
I felt the weight of command.
Yeah.
In his performance.
Yeah, because it was on his head. If this failed, it was him. He was on the chopping block, and he knew it. And to a point, I would definitely say that is accurate, and that was. I mean, Henry Fonda's good in anything he was in. Let's be honest.
I read that that Fonda had read that Nimitz lost a finger, and or a piece of a finger, and the whole time he was filming the movie, he was holding his finger just to embody,
I know Yamamoto did. Yamamoto lost a piece of a finger.
Yeah.
At Tsushima in 1905. Anyway. Use of the footage in this film. We were talking about that briefly before this podcast started. This is a big quote, air quotes, big budget epic, American epic in 1976, and it's just my opinion. And I want to hear all y'all's, but it's just my opinion. Man, they shortchanged this sucker.
Oh, no kidding.
They really, they were tight when it came to expenditures here. They used footage from other movies, which, like you and I were talking, Christelle, the ones from 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, which is at the beginning, the sepia, where they show the Doolittle raid. I think that was legitimate. That was okay because it was well shot, and it serves the purpose.
Yeah, and especially since the Doolittle raid is kind of off-scene.
Yeah.
So it's not really part of the movie. So I see that. I see that using, but the rest is just, it's embarrassing.
It really is. It's crap. and I mean,
sorry.
There's nothing to be sorry about because you're right. But, I mean, the footage from other movies was not good at all. And then the archival footage, the actual World War II footage is something that I specialize in, was all wrong. There wasn't a single piece, not one, that was accurate at all. I mean, for crying out loud, John Ford, and my favorite director, was on Midway and filmed a documentary on Midway in color. And they didn't use any of that footage in this movie entitled, wait for it, Midway. Why? I don't understand. I mean, this is John Ford, for crying out loud. None of that was used. I don't know. But damn. I mean, it's just bad.
We own the John Ford movie.
We do, yeah, I have it.
Made by the government. It was made by the government.
Right, yeah.
So,
yeah.
I thought, I agree completely, and I thought it even extended to the stuff that was shot in studio.
Absolutely.
It had a total television of the era look. The cinematographer, this may explain it, did 87 episodes of Gunsmoke, and it felt like like Rockford Files. It felt like a Kojak. I mean, a lot of the framing and lighting and The director was well known for moving quickly and getting shots quickly, and that sort of compounds the problem with the used footage. I even read somewhere that one of the carrier crashes was from the Korean War.
Yes.
A jet. It's a jet. It's a Panther. Hits the back of a deck and boom, blows up. And there were no jets in 1942.
And I would think
not
that
at Midway.
The World War II veteran audience watching in 1976 would have known all of that and would have absorbed all of that. And I don't think it mattered, strangely, to the producers. Many of the cast and the director and the cinematographer were World War II veterans, which would have been possible in 1976. So that sort of, to me, that all those things kind of compound the fact that it does feel cheap, and that might explain why they introduced a gimmick at release called Sensurround, which was like huge speakers. It opened in 300 theaters, and it was something that was almost like smell-o-vision or 3D in the old days. It was a film gimmick of the time, introduced by Earthquake. And I don't know if that saved it and made it a box office hit. I don't know. But to me, of course, I watched it on my phone.
What? Dave.
You
are killing the film industry just right there.
And that may explain how it appeared to me, but my take was that it looked a lot like 70s TV.
Yeah,
it did.
I would have to agree there was just nothing visual about the film at all, which is why I actually appreciated the Archival, because I think that there were a couple things happening there.
Let me be clear. The Archival's good.
Yeah.
It's just not accurate for this movie.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I was really fascinated by the sort of opening title of the film, or the opening titles card of the film, where it says "documented where possible," which implies that this footage that we're watching is in some kind of way accurate, one, but also a part of the narrative that we're watching. They're not just pure extrapolations of other narrative films, right? Some of which also were released by Universal, which may have been why they were able to get rights to certain footage and not to others, although, I'm not sure. But I think about this conversation that exists now about hybrid filmmaking, quote unquote, and how that sort of this blinded reckoning with neorealism, which happened also after the war in Italy, which was a sort of complete removal from studio making and making films just by all means possible, by what was available to you, non-professional actors, daylight. And you see now with a lot of independent filmmaking for the past 10 years, working in a space that's both documentary and narrative. And so there's something interesting to me about, even if they're inaccurate, even if it's sort of bad archival choices, the blending of the two as this implied cohesive reality that is pretty interesting.
I think you're being very too nice.
Yeah.
I think you imply that there was some thinking about trying to combine this medium and to create something new and have some hybrid thing. I think they were just cheap.
I don't think they knew what they were doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's why I'm interested in it.
Right.
It has nothing to do with the director or those choices.
As an artifact of the era, it's of interest to me in a very similar way.
Yeah.
So,
But, I mean, it's almost misleading by saying, we're going to have archival footage. When you take scenes from another feature film, this is not an archival footage.
Yeah. That was about Pearl Harbor. By the way, there's scenes from Tor.
Yeah, this is, I don't know. And I agree the gimmick of the Sensurround is, for me, I think that would explain more the success, the box office success. People want to see how it would sound. And of course, you have this fabulous cast, to be fair. I mean, those are still in 76, very, very popular actors. But, I don't know. They're just horrible. It was almost jarring, the difference in lighting. I mean, in colors and tone and everything. You watch, something film, I don't know where, and suddenly, poof, you have an archival piece, and then you go back to that, and it's not even the same angle. It's like 101. It's 101 cinematography that they completely disregarded.
Yeah.
And in 21st century, I would appreciate that as an I don't know, post avant-garde something.
Right.
But in 1976, it's just poor craftsmanship. It's just
I mean, that's part of what's so incredible about filmmaking, or any art form, is that the mistakes and the intention, all of that starts to shift and evolve and transform as time goes on. And so what to them was I don't know what, to us is something really different and speaks to memory and genre in a way that I think wasn't even totally anticipated.
I mean, I think the main reason also behind making this movie is the anniversary. This is what they were shooting for. This was where's my math? 30 years.
82 would have been the 40th?
40th, so this would have been...
There was an anniversary anyway. They were
35-ish.
trying to catch on and celebrate, but yeah.
I don't know. I just think they didn't care. I'm serious. I really do. I really don't think that they cared very much. This movie was based off of a piece of fiction. Obviously not the battle, but it was a book written by Donald Sanford, and it was a fictional work on the Battle of Midway. And so there was no... I wasn't in the script writing offices, obviously, so I can't say that there was no consultation to historical record, but being a historian and having studied the Battle of Midway for the better part of my life, I can tell you right now there was not very much, if there was any at all. So I think they just didn't care. They tried to make a blockbuster, and this is a neat event. This is a really exciting event, so let's make it about this, and let's make things blow up really good, a la Pearl Harbor a few years later, but that's another one. But, it is what it is. So I'm going to ask this question, and I'll start with Dave and work back around. Dave, did you like this film, and would you recommend it?
No and no. Although I found all kinds of things to research coming out of it. It sparked a lot of curiosity about that era of filmmaking. That year in filmmaking, I mean, Network and Taxi Driver bracketed the release of this film. Jaws was the year earlier. They were making Star Wars at the time this movie came out. All that context, I would never have thought about had I not watched the film. And and now that I work at the museum, I'm so much more interested in, accuracy and nonfiction when it comes to the war. The war's an epic story with just nouns and verbs and with just facts. And so all of those things sort of made it a bit of a chore to watch, but I found things to follow up with. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Learn. Garrett, what about you?
I would have to agree. I would not recommend this film to anybody. But I do think it poses really great questions and makes me, personally, as someone who doesn't make war films, to think about what is the function of a war film, what's the purpose of it, not only for those who participated in it, but for those who have no relationship in any kind of immediate level to war. So I think in that way it brings up some good questions. But is it a good film? No. In fact, it was really irritating on a lot of levels.
Christelle?
I think we're going to be all on the same board about that.
I
No, I did not like it. I would not recommend it. I would agree, though, with both Dave and Garrett that, the insertion of the, fake love story Japanese internment camp, that I also had to go back and see, okay, when did this conversation started? So it made me think about, okay, why, besides the typical trope and we need to have a love story and maybe it will attract some female audience, why put that in? I don't know if it was in the book, and then I just stick to the book, for example. That's a possibility. But otherwise, no, I think it was tedious to watch. It was painful, and as an historian, it was...
Insulting.
My heart is still aching from watching it.
As a historian, it's insulting. I think you kind of catch my drift, my vibe on this movie from the get-go. Absolutely not what I would never recommend this movie to anybody who wants to know about Midway. If you want to watch things blow up, check it out. But if you want to learn about the Battle of Midway, do not watch this film. I mean, again, I have 5 pages of inaccuracies written here that, we could go for another couple of hours.
So I've got to ask right away, what's your favorite inaccuracy?
Well, there's many, but the one that drives me crazy, and it was a myth that was perpetuated by this friggin' movie, is that when the SPDs attacked in the morning of the 4th at 10:22 a.m. on the 4th of June, that the Japanese aircraft carriers' flight decks were littered with armed and refueled airplanes. That is not true. That is not true. The Kaga, which was the first Japanese carrier struck by American bombs, was hit. They don't even know how many times it was hit so bad, so many times. But it was at least 6 or 7 times by 500 and 1,000-pound bombs. I mean, it was eviscerated. It was literally just gutted. And the Akagi, which was the flagship at Midway and Pearl Harbor, by the way, was hit by 1. And they all had these devastating explosions, which is real, which is true. It would never have happened if the aircraft were on the flight deck, because those explosions are going to go where? They're going to go up. So there's going to be fires, but there's not going to be these catastrophic explosions which killed these 4 carriers. The Japanese airplanes were in the hangar decks, and they were being refueled and rearmed. And the story, the myth, was perpetuated even by the guys that were there. I think the memory had, and this is a conversation for another time, is, oh yeah, I remember seeing planes all over the flight deck. No, you didn't. They weren't there. The Japanese records show they weren't there. They were in there. You couldn't, unless you had X-ray vision, you could not see down in those flight decks. But that's what causes catastrophic explosions, because when the bombs went off, they lit the torpedoes and the fuel and the bomb and all this stuff, and they had nowhere to go, because the Japanese carriers weren't built like ours. They didn't have ventilated areas, so everything went in and up and up they went. So that is that's a killer to me. That's
okay,
just,
I'll tell you mine now. At some point, there's a cockpit fire, and there's a fire extinguisher that's introduced that looks as if they pulled it off the wall of the soundstage. It looks like
because they probably did.
Because they probably did. I'm not quite at the operational expertise level as you are on something like that, but that is a 1970s fire extinguisher in that 1940s cockpit. Anyway, I laughed out loud at that one.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I know exactly what you're talking about.
I didn't mean to throw this off that direction, but
no, but it's.
I think it's fine. We were very restrained in how much the film was inaccurate, so I think we can throw a couple. My favorite is Charlton Heston taking off on one plane and come back in a different plane.
Right. And then they show him in the air in a different plane, too.
Yes,
so
it's 3 different
airplanes.
planes. Yeah. So
dude's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Superman.
Oh, another myth, and I got to throw this in just for those people who don't listen to the mini episode, which you should. The Aleutians operation was actually not part of the Midway operation. They say in the movie that it was a diversion. Not true. Completely different operation altogether. So it just happened to take place at the same time because the Japanese had so much material that they could launch an operation like that at the same time, a la United States in 1944 in June, and although not to the same level. So it was not part of Midway. A lot of people think it is, but it wasn't. Can you guys sum this film up in one sentence or even a line from the movie? Garrett, I'll start with you.
Basic.
Basic. Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, one word. I can't even. First of all,
sentence.
One sentence. I'm not really good with that kind of stuff, to be honest with you. So it's just the first word that comes to me really is just that it's there's nothing extraordinary about this film on any level, visually, from a creative standpoint, from a cinematic standpoint.
Right. And there could have been, if they would have followed the actual story of the event, there could have been.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing opportunity to work with air. I mean, the fact that so much of it took place in air.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very expensive to film.
Yeah.
Which we come back to, they were cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, but a lot of those airplanes that were at that event, the SBDs, and obviously not TBDs, but SBDs and Zeros, I mean, there were and still are flying examples of those airplanes. Yeah, you don't have squadrons of them, no. But, I mean, fork over some cash, man. Damn. Christelle, can you sum it up?
I think it's very dated film definitely from the cinematography and the visual of it. And as we talked about for close to an hour, it's just so historically inaccurate. It's just I thought I had wasted 2+ hours of my time watching it. But as we talked about, then I went and I watched a couple of documentaries, 2 videos, especially with a lot of maps. I'm very visual, and I have to say, in the middle of the film, I didn't know where I was and who was attacking who. I got a little confused, and I thought they missed an opportunity when they had this huge map on the table. They should have done a little bit more of a moving of little ships and stuff to show where they were. But yeah, no, I will. Waste of time.
I like the idea of possibly making a film that's so bad it makes you want to watch other films. Like, maybe that's a tactic.
Maybe that's what they
Some
tried to
level.
do, and if that was the case, that they were very
Exactly.
successful.
They're like, let's get these folks
guys
on Wikipedia.
nailed it.
No Wikipedia in 76, so no internet, so
No phones.
no phone.
My sentence would be, great payday for Robert Mitchum. He worked one day in his pajamas, walked out of Universal, drove to the smokehouse for a couple of pops, and then drove home. It was that to me says everything you need to know about the movie. Here was one of the great movie stars who worked for one day, played sort of a pivotal part in the story, and the fact that he was anyway that 70s blockbuster, big cast. That would have been better if they just completely made up a story for it and applied that budget to something that wasn't so important and epic and real in the 20th century history. That's a long sentence. That's multiple clauses.
No, you're good to go.
Yeah.
I usually try and sum up my closing comments with a line from this movie or something like that, but it sucks so bad that I really couldn't pull out a line. I have historical lines here, but I'm not going to say them because we'll talk about that in the mini episode next week, so listen to that.
No,
But,
we can take the quote you had. Were we better than Japanese or just lucky? No, we were worse. And
No,
movie
we
was
weren't
worse.
worse. No,
the
not at all.
movie.
The movie. Yeah. No, were we luckier than the Japanese or just better? No, that we were lucky and better in some instances. But anyway, not a fan. Not a fan.
At the last minute, I'd like to interject a little element of hope. Roland Emmerich, who's in the blockbuster business, is making a Midway movie with, I think, filming starting next month as we speak.
Yeah, and it terrifies me because Woody Harrelson's
Yeah.
son.
And Roland Emmerich is a terrible filmmaker.
He makes blockbusters. And
And so did Michael Bay in Pearl Harbor. That's all I'm gonna
and there's
say.
an opportunity here for special or CGI and for ways to recreate the battle in
That's
ways
true.
that weren't possible before.
I would agree with that, and in that respect, maybe there's a little hope for some accuracy there, but again, let's be honest, probably not. Probably not. You want to see a movie about Midway? We just haven't made it yet here at the museum. So, with that being said, I want to thank everybody for listening. If you'd like to hear more about the events we discussed today, listen to our mini episode next week where we will share oral histories from those who were there. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Service on Celluloid. Be sure to rate and review us on iTunes if you like what you hear. I'd like to thank everyone who made this podcast possible, our producer, Tessa Jager, and our sound engineer, Jeremy Burson. This has been a production of the National World War II Museum.